In this overall act, Iago continues to effect his plan in order to subvert the Moor and convince him that Desdemona has been unfaithful to him. He speaks to the Moor, Othello, alone for some time. Then Othello interacts with Desdemona when he receives word from Venice that he is being recalled. Michael Cassio is to be put into place as his replacement to govern the island because the individuals, the men of royal siege in Venice, are not aware of what has transpired on the island. They're not aware that Cassio has been stripped of his position. And so Othello starts to think of Cassio as a form of usurper in both public and private. Now, this is almost further subconscious affirmation of Cassio's usurpation of his role as Desdemona's sexual partner and husband, because he's doing the exact same thing in the public realm. He is taking over Othello's public place. And this reality, the actual events that are transpiring at this moment relative to Cassio, begin to rankle and exacerbate the pre-existing suspicions that he had regarding Cassio's conduct towards his wife. Iago then stages a kind of play for Othello's benefit. He attempts to deceive Othello into believing that Michael Cassio and Iago, as they are conversing some ways away, are speaking about Desdemona. Othello listens in on the conversation. He takes a position as almost a member of the audience. Othello is almost being removed from the play, becoming a passive observer of events that are being orchestrated to his detriment. Because he overhears this conversation, he believes that he has proof of Cassio's intentions towards Desdemona, and that she has given the handkerchief that he gave to her originally to Michael Cassio as a sign of his affection, or her affection for him. Iago continues to poison the general's mind. Othello engages with Desdemona, treats her cruelly, and is castigated for it by the other Venetians who are assembled around him, and is reviled for his violence towards her. In Act 4, Scene 3, Emilia and Desdemona have an extensive conversation about the willow song and the wedding sheets that Desdemona asks Emilia to put onto her bed. And she makes a strange utterance when she says, "Should I die this evening, pray thee, please, bury me in these self-same sheets." What's going on in that moment requires a bit of an unpacking of cultural presumptions, expectations, and norms from this particular period. So the second video that I post this week is going to be devoted to that. In this video, we're going to talk about three things: the language of honor that Iago continues to attempt to deploy, types and stereotypes, Othello's concerns about being reduced to a fixed figure for the scorn of time, and what he means by that, and how Iago has actually fostered this concern in Othello's mind, or preyed upon it, and then fostered it. And Iago's continued use of metatheatricality, which we discussed earlier on in the play, and that we've been carrying through, as we noted that Iago serves almost as the director of this play, or even the playwright who is writing the narrative of the play that unfolds. First, I'd like to turn to Act 4, Scene 1, lines 13 to 21, as Iago continues to deploy this language of honor. Othello asks, she is protectress of her honor too. May she give that? So he's trying to, he's almost insulting Desdemona. Might she give that away, her honor? Her honor is an essence that's not seen. They have it very oft that have it not. But for the handkerchief. Right? So Iago is saying, many people have honor who don't actually have honor. They have all the external signifiers of it. They are reputed as having honor. They have a reputation of being honorable, but they don't actually possess any honor. Here, again, we have that tremendous revelation or self-revelation on the part of Iago, but at this point, Othello is too far gone to recognize it. He offers Othello a tremendous piece of advice. Othello is fixated upon the external signifiers of honor. I fetch my life and being from men of royal siege, and my demerits may speak unbonneted to as proud a fortune as this that I have reached. But that I love the gentle Desdemona, no, Iago, I would not my free unhoused condition put her to circumscription for the sea's worth. In other words, Othello said earlier on in the play that everything that he was derived from his honor, from the honor that he received, the extolation that he received from men of royal siege. Iago is correct. He's telling Othello something that is true. You can't trust in honor because oftentimes many people who profess to have it and appear to have it, who have received honor and accolades from their superiors, don't actually have any honor at all. And in this way, he's speaking about himself. This assertion calls to mind what Iago had to say earlier on the play. And what's he then that says I play the villain, when this advice is free I give and honest, probable to thinking? Iago says this of Cassio, that indeed, Cassio, I was right to tell you, or I was right to tell Cassio, that he should sue to Desdemona and request her assistance, because this is indeed the way that he might obtain Othello's favor. So who's to say that I'm the villain? At this moment, Iago's doing the same thing. Who's to say that I'm the villain? I'm telling Othello something that is true. Because, after all, when devils wear their blackest sins put on, they do suggest at first with heavenly shows as I do now. Iago is a master at telling the truth to do evil by it, to put on the appearance of doing something good that would be good were it couched in a different context, and actually working evil through it. He corrects Othello's misperceptions about honor, but in the end, it's designed to destroy him. Now, Iago and Othello begin to speak about cuckoldry, about men who have been betrayed by their wives, and Othello begins to diminish his own humanity, suggesting that he has lost both his public position and his humanity as a result because he has been cuckolded. He says in Act 4, Scene 1, line 58, "A horned man's a monster and a beast." And Iago responds, "There's many a beast then in a populous city, and many a civil monster." So in response to Othello's denigration of his own humanity, Iago says, you're not alone in this. Innumerable men are in the same position as you. Now, this might seem to be a comforting affirmation of the similarities between men, the shared grief and pain. And it becomes so when Desdemona and Emilia begin speaking of the same terms, that there are many wronged women in this world whose husbands have been unfaithful to them. And in their case, as we'll see with the Willow Song, it allows them to create a kind of community of mutual understanding and empathy. But for Othello, this is the worst thing that he could possibly hear. Othello seems to be receiving comfort, or Iago seems to offer comfort, but it in fact does a grievous injury to Othello because he understands how Othello thinks. In the next scene, Othello laments in Act 4, Scene 2, lines 53 to 54. "But alas to make me the fixed figure for the scorn of time to point his slow and moving finger at. Alas to make me a fixed figure. Alas to make me an unchanging stereotype that is fixed in one position, that has no vibrancy, that has no life, that has no unique identity. Alas to reduce me down to this one thing for which I'll be remembered." He's speaking of the cuckold. This thing that we mocked and jeered at throughout history, not because of who he was as a unique individual, the kind of unique individual that Othello is trying to proclaim himself to be against the color and racial stereotypes of his age, but the fixed figure, this one type or stereotype that is fixed, locked into position, never to be interpreted, never to be reimagined by other people who are to come into the future, but instead to be locked in this one identity, fixed as the cuckold. Not a person, but a type. So as Iago refers to all these other men who are exactly the same as Othello, Othello hears the death knell of his own identity. He hears the obliteration of everything that he has tried to accomplish in his life, wresting a unique identity and recognition of that unique identity and his humanity away from the racist people that he meets in his life. He sees the end of it, because now he is not that. He's not a general. He's not a man who has accomplished unique and wondrous feats. He is just a cuckold. He's just a type or a stereotype. This is Iago's objective, to reduce individuals down to types, stereotypes, fixed figures for the scorn of time, without humanity, without vibrancy. Alas to make me a fixed figure for the scorn of time. As we move on in Act 4, we begin to enter a moment of heightened metatheatricality. Now, we've discussed metatheatricality in the past, but I'm going to give you another definition of it, or I'm going to reaffirm the definition that we've already established. Meta literally means about. So a metafictional work is a fiction that is in some sense, or a work of fiction that is in some sense about fiction itself. Usually it refers to work that is self-conscious or self-aware of its own status as fiction. And if you want to have an example of that, I posted a clip from a Deadpool movie. If you pause the video and watch that clip now, that example is metatextual. It reveals the fact that it is fictional. Um, Deadpool, or Ryan Reynolds, murders himself. Right? The character of Deadpool murders Ryan Reynolds, who is reading the script for Green Lantern. Right? He is going back into the actor's history and interacting with it. He is rendering into reality or making evident his own status as a fictional construct being played by the actor Ryan Reynolds. That is metatextual. That's meta, that's metafictional. Right? The story is revealing itself to be fictional by referring to its own fictional context, the actors that are performing in it, and making evident the fact that it is just a construct. Now, metatheater metatheater occurs when we have a play that reveals itself to be, well, a play. The characters suddenly start referring to themselves as fictional constructs, or acknowledging the fact that they are, in some sense, actors. In Act 3, Iago staged a conflict between Cassio and Rodrigo. It was a moment of explicit metatheatricality because Iago stopped being a character inside the play. In a sense, he moved away from that position and became the director of events, ordering characters about, giving them their lines, telling them when they should enter the scene, when they should exit, what their motivations are for a given scene. That would be a moment of metatheatricality. In this act, we have Iago becoming an actor in a play that he writes and directs from within the play. There are multiple layers of metatheatricality. You have Iago as the character inside Shakespeare's play, who becomes a character in something that he is staging. And at the same time as he is a character inside that little play within the play, he's also directing it, giving characters their line, redirecting the conversation in such a way as to negatively influence Othello, the substitute audience. And it is that scene to which I'd like to turn now. So I'd like you to take a few minutes to think about this question that I pose. You don't have to submit your answers to me. All you have to do is think about this question because I want to give you time to practice engaging with the work and thinking about it. We'll come back to it in a few minutes, and I'll provide you my own answers to this question. Iago tells us what this play is going to be about, what he's going to be doing in this play within a play. Now I will question Cassio of Bianca, a hussy that is selling her desires, buys herself bread and clothes. It is a creature that dotes on Cassio, and 'tis the strumpet's plague to beguile many and be beguiled one by one. So he's talking about this whore, literally, who Cassio frequents, and who has many men, attracts many men, but has fallen in love with Cassio and believes that he's going to marry her. Now, Othello can only hear bits and pieces of this conversation. His mind and the way that Iago has primed him to respond in the worst way possible to the show that he presents is all that is necessary for him to fill in the blanks with the worst possible conclusions. He is the one who invents the connective tissue that binds together the various different things that the characters say. He invents the meaning of the pieces of the play that he can make out. He's reduced to the status of a passive observer, and he becomes like a member of the audience. He's interjecting, not like Iago was in Act 1 to control what was going on or to influence it. He's interacting with it and interjecting with asides that complement the performance, reacting according to Iago's desires. So, they laugh that wins. Do you triumph, Roman? Do you triumph? Now he denies it faintly and laughs it out. Now he inopportunes him to tell it o'er. Go to, well said, well said. So he's commenting on the performance without affecting it, and he's almost praising the way in which the characters are acting and the emotions that they provoke inside of him. Right? Oh, well said, Iago. Masterfully done. Masterful performance. Earlier on, the characters that Iago manipulated in his stage shows, his plays within the play, the interaction between Cassio and Rodrigo, the drunken brawl, and the interaction between Rodrigo and Brabantio. In those moments, he reduced other characters. He turned them into his pawns, his puppets, his actors inside the stage shows that he was putting on. But in this moment, as he takes on the role of actor and director at once, he loses none of his power. He's able to deploy the conventions of metatheatricality and the conventions of theatricality itself to his own benefit. He has complete control over them and is actually rendered more powerful because of them, as opposed to being diminished. Desdemona has not been unaffected by the events that have transpired here. Othello, in front of the assembled company from Venice, treats her cruelty, accuses her repeatedly of being unfaithful, of being a whore, and then he strikes her, assaults her physically. So in line 232, he calls her a devil and then strikes her. She responds to this by saying, "I have not deserved this." All the other characters act in accordance with the repugnance of this action. They find it to be absolutely abhorrent because, of course, such assaults, such abuse would have been illegal in Shakespeare's period. Now, Desdemona has enough self-assurance to say that this was wrong. "I am confident enough in my identity to tell you, Othello, that I have not deserved this," she responds. So, she speaks out against this injustice in front of the assembled men. And they support her in that because they recognize that it too was an injustice. But they have no legal or recourse against Othello because he still has such a high public position. They would have to wait until he either does something that is even more egregious, or until he returns to Venice and it can face censure from his superiors before they can act against him. But they still try to counsel him to rein in his temper. In Act 4, Scene 2, we have a continuation of Desdemona's characterization. We see the way in which Othello's mistreatment of her has affected her and affected her self-conception. In this scene, Act 4, Scene 1, she demonstrates a kind of confidence in her identity, but there's a strange parallelism between her and her husband, one that we've noted throughout this play. They're both subjects of the tragic narrative, and we are to look onto the injustices that are inflicted upon both of them in a similar tragic light. We're meant to view these things as being horrific and abhorrent. Here, she begins to lose her sense of self, much as Othello does. Remember that at the beginning of this play, Othello was cool, he was immovable in his assurance and his confidence, or at least he appeared so. But as we went through the play, we realized that he had these deep abiding concerns about his own identity and his value as a human being, because so often he was not treated as one, and other people didn't empathize with him. It was for that reason that he fell in love with Desdemona, because she could empathize with him, because both of them were subjected unfairly. Both of them knew the sting of prejudice and reduction. Both of them had their voices and had their humanity attenuated and diminished. They found love in each other because they could empathize with one another. In the same way that Othello's confidence was in fact a false front, a veneer, so too is Desdemona's. What I'd like you to do as we move into this second scene of Act 4 is to consider the interactions between Desdemona, Emilia, and Iago. Look at lines 104 to 129. Why does Desdemona make the request that she does of Emilia? What does it suggest about her state of mind? And then, how would you characterize and describe Desdemona's brief conversation with Iago? Again, you don't have to answer these questions for me or submit them. Just take some time to think about them, to get used to engaging with the play as practice for your final essay, and then come back and listen to my responses. All right, so the wedding sheets here for Desdemona are akin to the handkerchief for Othello. They both operate within a symbolic realm wherein chastity can be figured in physical terms. For her, the wedding sheets are a representation of her fidelity to Othello. Now, there's a great question that is never resolved within this play. We never actually receive an answer to it. That question is whether Othello and Desdemona have actually consummated their relationship. Had they had sex? We don't know, and the play never really reveals it to us. Now, it seems as if they're eternally being interrupted in the middle of the night. Iago persuades Brabantio to disrupt Othello in the middle of the night when he is visiting Desdemona, so it seems as if they were prevented from consummating their relationship or their marriage then. Cassio awakens them in the middle of the night, drawing him away from Desdemona. And very little time has passed since that drunken brawl. So we don't know, or at least we have no evidence to suggest that they have had marital relations. Either way, the bed sheets would have a particular resonance for Shakespeare's Elizabethan audience. Oftentimes, when you are a virgin, obviously the woman bleeds after the hymen breaks. The wedding sheets stained with that virginal blood as a testament to her purity, to her chastity, to her devotion to the husband, would have had a tremendous kind of resonance for the Elizabethan audience. As Desdemona takes the wedding sheets and asks them to be placed on her bed, one of two things is happening here. Either she wants those wedding sheets to display them to Othello, to again reaffirm her chastity, to show that I was a virgin when I married you, and here's the physical testimony of the fact that I gave myself to you and no other, the blood that stains the wedding sheets. Or it could be an attempt to invite him to consummate the marriage and have physical, ocular proof of her fidelity to him. Either way, the wedding sheets are bound up in this complex web of chastity and fidelity. Now, she needs this reaffirmation. Othello needs it. She knows that Othello needs it, but she also needs it as well. Because look at her question to Iago. As she turns to this man who has destroyed everything that she loves, or is at least on the cusp of doing so, and she asks him, she begs him, she looks to him for definition of her identity. Am I that name, Iago? Am I what he called me? Am I a whore? She is so distraught that she turns to any source of affirmation that she can. And Iago thrills at this. He has subjected both Othello and Desdemona to him. Both of them have knelt before him, and his victory is all but complete. Both of them are turning to him to define their identities. And we are meant to look on this with horror, just as we are with Othello. Iago then takes this perverse delight in allowing her, or in assisting her, to rise, just as he did with her husband. And so the power dynamics that were established in that earlier interaction between them, with Desdemona apparently or seemingly besting him in a battle of wits, have been inverted. Iago has elevated himself, has risen inside this hierarchy of speech and reason, this hierarchy of humanity, because he has destroyed the humanity and compromised the identities of the people around him. Othello is no longer a general. He's not even a human in his own mind. He's a cuckold, a fixed figure, a stereotype, a type, an animal. Desdemona is not the vibrant, intelligent woman who stood before the Duke and company in the public realm and used the voice that was given to her to best effect. She is a woman who kneels before him. Now, Shakespeare is not embracing these things. They are meant to be part of the tragedy. We, like the characters, are meant to feel broken over the way in which they have been so diminished. As we move on, we're going to be looking at the continued evolution of the symbolic meaning of the wedding sheets, and we'll turn to this rarefied medium of song as Desdemona can no longer express herself in public voice, can no longer express herself in mere words. She has been silenced by her husband. She has been denied the public voice that he granted her. She's been stripped of her identity. She is lost. And in the next scene, she recognizes that her death is coming for her and that she is going to be silenced eternally.